All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. Apologies. Here we go. Uh, Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes Assistant Professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona, Shayda Kafai, who will discuss the book we need right now, Crip Kinship, The Disability, Justice, and Art Activism of Sins Invalid. Kafai will be in conversation with best-selling author of Pleasure Activism and Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Maree Brown. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. Left Bank Books would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Shayda and Adrienne, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope you enjoyed this event, and we hope you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or all of your friends at left-bank.com. The pub date has been pushed back a little, but you can pre-order your copy now. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating and allows us to keep this event series going. Thank you for your support. We need your support. I am Shane Mullen, the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from the audience towards the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. Be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. A brief audio description for everyone. I am wearing a dark blue sweater with light blue stripes. I have various art in the background and a very full bookshelf. Tonight's event will have cart captioning provided by Corey Dosty and ASL interpretation provided by Trisha Vasquez and Mac. Corey Dosty has been using captions since Co was 6 years old and became hard of hearing, and conveying tone and timing in typography has been an autistic special interest ever since. Co studied linguistics and mathematics, has been involved in gray, asexual, and genderqueer community language development, and is a proudly mad cart captioner, supporting students and radical causes through Co's work. About tonight's book, Crip Kinship, The Disability, Justice, and Art Activism of Sins Invalid. In recent years, disability activism has come into its own as a vital and necessary means to acknowledge the power and resilience of the disabled community and to call out ableist culture wherever it appears. Crip Kinship explores the art activism of Sins Invalid, a San Francisco Bay Area-based performance project, and its radical imaginings of what disabled, queer, trans, and gender nonconforming body minds of color can do, how they can rewrite oppression, and how they can gift us with transformational lessons for our collective survival. Grounded in their disability justice framework, Crip Kinship investigates the revolutionary survival teachings that disabled, queer of color community offers to all our body minds. From their focus on crip beauty and sexuality to manifesting digital kinship networks and crip-centric liberated zones, Sins Invalid empowers and moves us toward generating our collective liberation from our body minds outward. Alice Wong, the editor of Disability Visibility, First-Person Stories from the 21st Century, says, "As a longtime admirer of Sins Invalid, I am grateful for Shayda Kafai's Crip Kinship, the disability art activism of Sins Invalid. Crip wisdom and disability justice is what we need right now. Dreams, creativity, care, all these things are activism. The world can be better if we honor our body minds and move forward together. a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the difference between disability justice and disability rights. And now, about tonight's speakers. Shayda Kafai is an assistant professor of gender and sexuality studies at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona. As a queer, mad, femme of color, she commits to enacting the many ways we can reclaim our body minds from intersecting systems of oppression. She lives in Pomona, California, with her wife, Amy. Adrienne Maree Brown is the author of Holding Change, The Way of Emergent Strategy, Facilitation, and Meditation. We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good. Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, and the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements. She is the co-host of the How to Survive the End of the World, Octavia's Parables, and Emergent Strategy podcasts. Adrienne is rooted in Detroit. And now, I would like to welcome our guests for the evening, Shayda Kafai and Adrienne Maree Brown for Left Bank Books. If everyone would please applaud wherever you are to give them a hearty welcome. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I am stimmy joyous. I am excited. It's good to see you.
Beautiful. I'm similarly I feel very joyful and very honored to be included in this. And thank you, Left Bank Books, for continuously creating spaces that we can do this. Let's first give our visuals.
Yes, I can start us off. Hi, lovely humans out there. My name is Shayda. I am an olive skin-toned femme with pixie cut hair and my bangs going to the left side. I am wearing a pinkish lipstick, large hoop earrings with glass hanging on the end. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt with pink flowers on it. And behind me are pictures and plant babies and a lamp.
Very good. I'm like, wait, let me change my appearance very quickly. So I'm Adrienne Maree Brown, and I am mixed race Black femme wearing my hair in a messy ponytail from swimming. And I've got a black t-shirt on with Toni Morrison on the front of it. So I can show you from the Homegirl box. And I'm sitting in my office in front of a turquoise blue wall with an Octavia Butler like sacred space over my shoulder and a lot of other books with me. And excited to be here. And I just put on the Fenty Diamond Milk Lip Balm because I was like, I need to upscale just a bit because of your earrings. So I just need to be on par. So I'm really grateful to be here with you and to get to talk about this incredible book you've created for us. And I think it might make sense to read first to kind of bring people in with those introductory comments and then move into the questions that we have. So for everyone to see, we're talking about this gorgeous book. Not this part, because this is for the special pre-read advanced reader copy thing, but Crip Kinship, The Disability Justice and Art Activism of Sins Invalid. And will you read for us? And I'll read with you.
I would love to. All right, so this is the very opening page, and I want to start with an excerpt. So this is actually a quote from Access Centered Movement. You are not too sick, too disabled, too sad, too crazy, too ugly, too fat, or too weird. We live in a white supremacist, patriarchal, ableist culture that values oppressive standards for the sake of centralizing power and making profit. Our ostracism is the result of this system that demonizes difference and not a reflection of your worth, value, ability to be loved, etc. You are not the problem. You are perfect. This book is a love letter, an abundant offering written out of need. Need communicates, says disabled communities have wisdom, says we survive true when we declare and co-create a world that honors us, a world where we are never too much. Need says persistence, says crip magic, says now. I lean into this exploration of need for all of us, but especially for the disabled, crip, chronically ill, mad community who are also queer, gender nonconforming, or transgender, also people of color, also the incarcerated many, the immigrant many, all of us also. I have written this book because my own disabled, mad, queer, femme of color body mind needs to remember that ours is a legacy of resistance and revolution. Even as we live in the systemic, oppressive network of ableism, saneism, autism, racism, cis heteropatriarchy, classism, and capitalism, we gather and manifest liberatory practices. We always have. Our disabled queer of color body minds confront erasure and alienation. We actively revise the reductive narrative that we are inherently too damaged or too broken, that we are undeserving of celebration, joy, and beauty. For those of us who have been told otherwise, or who might have never had access to our crip queer stories, Sins Invalid exists as a tether rooting us back to ourselves. Since their creation in 2006, the San Francisco Bay Area-based Performance Project provides the community disability justice-informed evenings of multidisciplinary art, workshops, and educational trainings that center the knowledges of disabled, queer, gender nonconforming, and transgender artist activists of color. Crip Kinship, the disability justice and art activism of Sins Invalid, explores their work and demonstrates how all our body minds, communities, and movements can benefit from Sins Invalid's resilient, disabled, queer of color future making.
As I sit at my desk thinking about community, I pull a card from Christy C. Rhodes' Next World Tarot deck. Christy is a Cuban-American queer femme, punk singer, and artist activist. Her art and her words render intersectionality medicinal. In the booklet she has written to accompany the deck, she asks us, quote, how do we hold each other up in a world where oppression can be louder than self-love? The Next World Tarot is a femme hacker, eager to out the truth and tired of compromising her mind and body for stability, end quote. This deck is social justice activism, social justice art, and accordingly, the card I pulled to guide the writing of this introduction, the King of Cups, is not depicted as a white man on a throne. For Christy, the King of Cups is a brown femme with long, flowing hair. The King of Cups sits on her wheelchair, wearing comfortable, loose-fitting purple pants, an olive t-shirt with a peacock feather tucked behind her ear. This femme is barefoot, and her wheelchair rolls on a growing, living path. With a serene face, she offers us a lotus flower in her palms. Christie's King of Cups is queer, crip, decolonial radiance. She brings with her, quote, awareness of logic while maintaining a soft, open heart, end quote. With her call for balance, she invites us to harness our, quote, collected rage and unconditional love, end quote.
Crip kinship manifests a present moment of, quote, collected rage and unconditional love, end quote, for all our body minds. Led by the generational communal knowledges of disabled, queer, of color communities, in this present moment of our collective needs are met, how frequently ableism, racism, cis heteropatriarchy, and all the systems of oppression tell us to wait, tell us later, or tell us never. Dear reader, this moment is not solely aspirational. Sins Invalid reminds us that it is happening in our communities now in slow, messy, poignant, and nuanced ways. It is happening because the most marginalized of us have together willed it, given time to it, and fed it with collected rage and unconditional love. This movement is called disability justice, and it is the liberatory framework Sins Invalid uses to move us closer toward our collective liberation. I offer Sins Invalid and their strategies for living and thriving in this world as medicine for a contemporary moment that is precarious and that has left us exhausted and experiencing unrivaled instability.
Thank you. Thank you so much for knowing that this book was needed. I was saying before we came onto this live part that I've been obsessed with Sins Invalid for years. And as I mentioned, I think in the blurb for the book that, you know, I really feel like a lot of the people who have taught me about disability justice came through the portal of Sins Invalid. And now it feels like with this book, you are opening that portal to so many other people to understand not just how do we include disability, but actually how do we reframe everything about how we understand our body minds? How do we reframe everything in terms of how we understand pleasure and art and storytelling and community through this lens? So it's really a gift. And you made a good book here, Shayda. Like it's accessible, it's clear, it feels, you know, it's just like, oh, this feels like a piece of history that I can witness. And there were parts of it that I was laughing. There were parts that were turning me on and challenging me. And I mean, it's really good. So I think the thing I want to understand for you is why you felt like I need to tell the Sins Invalid story now. This is the moment when people need it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm so glad it brought you joy. I really, I felt like every single person I spoke to and interviewed for this book was sitting behind me as I was writing this, you know, like to the left of my computer, I have my little writing altar space, and, you know, I have all my queer, crip, and you know, of color ancestors there, but I felt like everybody else was present behind me. So I'm glad that it brought you joy and you felt them.
Yes.
So I stopped working on this project in 2014. I graduated. This was written about, Sins Invalid was written about in a totally different way because it had to be for my dissertation. And then I just needed to rest. Like I just needed to take a break. And in the summer of 2016, I started to read stories about crip erasure. Like I'm talking about like eugenics, violent forms, violent tangible, but also metaphoric forms of erasure. And I felt really sad, and I felt very, I felt like I needed some support, and I needed I needed permission to dream crip dreams, and I needed to see evidence. Like around that time when I was listening to the news, I was also reading the amazing blog of disability justice activist Mia Mingus.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and there was so much like just robust magic there, and her blog is called Leaving Evidence.
Yes.
And I was just like, yes, I need evidence. I need proof that crip folks have a legacy.
Yes.
That we have been present and that we're still doing this work. And it became the seedling that stepped me back into the work and really kind of invited me to talk to more Sins Invalid folks and just to like extend the conversations, and then just to, leave the world of theory and go into the practical wisdom and the movement building work that they had gathered.
That's right.
And really honor that.
Beautiful. And, I appreciate the long timeline of this book.
Yes.
I always feel like people think, oh, a book, like it's a couple years, and it's like, a book that entails more than one person, especially, can take a decade. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about the process of making the book, once you, especially where you're like, okay, I did my dissertation, but what I want to produce is a different thing. What was that process, and where are you in it? Like the book is about to come out, but this is a really wild time to be trying to publish things, just literally from the supply chain to like how events happen and everything else. So yeah, anything you want to share about the process?
The process was definitely in crip time, in mad time. And for folks that like, if that's like a new phrase, I mean, it's coming from the idea that time does not function the same for every body mind.
Right.
And so as a person with manic depression and anxiety, I may have had the intention of this is going to be a writing week or a writing day. And right? Like all good intentions. And then like, as you probably know, right? Like we wake up and we realize that's not going to happen today. And so it was very much done in slowness. Scheduling appointments with folks happened in slowness and tenderness.
Yes.
And if folks couldn't meet because it was not a compassionate body mind day, or they were just out of energy and capacity, or I was out of energy and capacity, we rescheduled. And so it became, I'm writing about cripness, but it became a practice of expressing that in really tangible ways as I was writing, and really having conversations with myself on the days where I felt I should be doing more, right? Like all these really aggressive, like capitalist mandates, like I had to really have honest conversations with myself and just allow it to rest so I can come back to it when I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
And, I wanted to write this as a love letter to community. And so I definitely wanted to find a social justice press.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Yeah, like that was, I nerd for life, academic for life, but I really wanted to find a social justice press so that this could be a document and love letter for community for everybody.
I love that. And you don't tend to write a love letter in a rush or with urgency that comes from anything other than passion, right? Like you're like, oh, I want to dally here. I want to think about this a lot and be in these conversations, so you can feel that time was taken. You can feel the intentionality in the book. And, we were also talking about that, just the slowness. This time has so much produced urgency, and to stand in the midst of that and recognize actually slowness is what's required right now, like moving at the pace of our bodies and moving at the pace of the story that wants to be told, trusting that it's not going anywhere because we're telling it, so I'm really grateful for this. And, I guess it would be great to just spend some time on what Crip Kinship entails, what all is included in that way of viewing the world and that kind of practice.
I have to say, not really side note, but I love that you said a love letter takes time.
Oh, yes. I'm like falling in love, it's like, it's not, I laugh all the time because I'm like, oh, it's not like falling. It's like rolling down this river with agency and choice and noticing everything along the way. That's different. It's quite lovely. But falling in love with a community, falling in love with a history, falling in love with an archive, it's like a very complex thing to, to really look at it all. And it feels like that, like you are like, wait, let's look at this from here. Let's look at this from this other perspective.
Yeah, because it's also like I don't know if you experienced this when reading, but when writing it, we live in an ableist world. And so, my own arrival at a disability, disabled mad identity came after much unlearning. But I felt like I was continuously being fed by Sins Invalid in the writing of the book. And anytime there was like an opportunity to really sit and view how I loved and viewed myself, it, like space just opened for that, which I thought was really, I hadn't thought of that until you just mentioned it.
Yeah, I have a question later I'm going to come to that is about how it changed you, because
Yes.
books change us,
Yeah. So Crip Kinship. The idea for Crip Kinship came from an early interview with the lovely Patty Byrne, and I had asked Patty to kind of share like what spaces is Sins Invalid holding?
Yes.
What is it offering to us? And Patty said that it offers a crip-centric liberated zone. And I was like, I need to know, like, what is that? Yeah, like that sounds, I'd love to live there. I want to be there. And so in the way that Patty described it, it's a place of communal witnessing. And, storytelling and art plays such an important role in that, like being able to witness and also recognize ourselves and our value as crip disabled folks, mad, chronically ill folks. And because it's a space liberated from oppression, we are invited with love. We are invited to be made familiar to ourselves once again.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it's like it's very much a collective practice. And when I was listening to the definition, I was thinking very much about how a crip-centric liberated zone is a place that resists erasure.
Yes.
Which that was that seedling feeling that I had about why I needed to return to this project.
Yes.
In 2016. And I was like, Patty, this feels like a multi-directional love practice. And again, very much like the intention is love and honoring and holding space.
Yes.
And so I think I talk about this type of liberated zone and why it's important in the beginning, because I feel like all the other chapters are like outgrowths and blossoms of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It feels exactly like that. Like it's like if this practice of kinship is at the center, then what does that look like in terms of how we live every aspect of our lives? And I think that I think that'll help people a lot, because I feel like there's, I even will say this for myself. When I first was thinking about disability as someone who didn't identify that way, even though I already had disabilities, but, I was still in that ableist mindset myself. As someone who sat in that location, I think my first thought of disability was just like, how do we just include people who have a physical disability? And that was like the thing, right? And it was like, oh, that's not the only kinds of disability. It spreads. And it's like, actually, we're looking at whole lives. We're looking at family systems. We're looking at every system of society. We're looking at how sex happens, how love happens, parenting, every aspect of it. And that it has impacts in all of those places. And that everyone wants the full experience of life, really. There's something for me about that radical reclamation of like, I'm not going to have anything less. I'm not going to have anything other than, I want the whole experience. And actually, it can be even better if we're really centering all these needs. So I think this is something, as I read this text, but also as I've been learning about disability justice, I'm like, everyone needs to know about this and everyone needs to be oriented around this. And so I wanted to ask you, if you, as you were writing this book and as you were doing the interviews, who did you have in mind for the readers? Who do you want to sit with this book, take this in, internalize these practices?
The first thing that I think about, because it's a documenting of history that I wasn't even familiar with, as a disabled mad person, I offer it to other disabled, queer, mad folks, chronically ill folks. And so it's for community, but it's also because you were saying, this disability justice is for everybody. Their last principle, they have 10 principles, and the 10th one, talks about, moving forward and manifesting collective liberation for everyone, not just disabled folks. And so in that framing, I really want this to be for folks who maybe are learning about disability or the word ableism for the first time.
Yes.
I thought about my students when I was writing this too, and the really phenomenal conversations we had in classroom space. I thought about my family. I thought about my queer family.
Yes.
And so I really do mean it to be for everyone. Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's necessary for everyone to understand, like, I did not have a conception of it's okay for me to share my needs and communicate my needs outside of shame before disability justice.
Yes.
And
I mean, that's the part of it. I think in queer community, we use that term of chosen family, but because for many of us, we're coming from a space that our families didn't know how to hold needs. And that's not even what they were structured to do. It's like we're structured to like help each other survive. We're structured to be labor. We're structured, there are so many other things that happen, but family became spaces that held trauma and that passed on trauma. And so it's like really reorienting the entire idea of what it means to be kin. And that is an offer that can be made to everyone because, we know that ability is temporary and everyone is going to be in this space and our needs are ever shifting. It's such a radical reframe. I'm really grateful that you have written it. And I especially am like, I'm glad this book exists because I feel like there are younger people coming into movement space. When I think about myself as a 21, 22-year-old, I'm like, oh, I wish this had been one of the books that was like, oh, everyone reads this book. Like, when you're coming into movement, you read Crip Kinship, right? I think that will be helpful. Now I want to ask what you want people to take away from the book. Like when you imagine someone has read this book and they are able to move differently, right? Through conversations, through structures. What is it that you want people to take away from this? What are the big, big lessons from Sins Invalid?
Can I say more than one?
I want you to say as many as you want. Like what are the big things that you're like, oh, this.
Yeah. So this comes from an essay that I read by Talila Lewis, and it was about the potential and the importance of dream work.
Oh, yeah.
And so I feel like the performance spaces that Sins Invalid is offering, and when I first learned about their work, I wasn't able to go and drive to San Francisco and see one of their performances. So I was in my room on my bed with my laptop, and I was able to experience. It's a different kind of experiencing, but I was still able to experience, and the performance initiated dreaming for me. And really thinking about what the potential is for all our body minds, and I think in many, many different ways. The potential of disabled folks, of mad and chronically ill folks, that's not something we talk about.
Yes.
And so that's one of the main things I hope people take away. And then the reciprocity of dreaming, right? If you witness somebody engaging in this practice, what spaces of liberation and recognition could you dream? How would you contribute to that conversation? That's one of the big first things that comes to my mind. And the other big thing that comes to mind is around their principle of sustainability. I think, I know that we're all functioning under capitalism, And there are so many rigorous mandates that are placed on us and that we internalize and then repeat over and over again. I mean, I know I do. And so reading about sustainability and the practice of sustainability, and being able to, or being empowered to say no,
Yes.
as an important part of movement building work, and generating that work and moving slowly and asking what each other's needs are before beginning.
Yes.
Inviting rest. Those are critical components that come up for me as I was reading, and that I hope folks take away. And just the idea that all our body minds have validity and resonance and value, and our stories deserve to be told, and we deserve pleasure, and we deserve beauty, and all of the different elements that are so critical to their mission and their vision statement. We all deserve a crip-centric liberated zone. We deserve to live in that.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this, it really is a celebration of the biodiversity. Right? Okay, motorcycle.
That was intense. That was a car.
Oh wow, it's like something has happened. Someone is showing out that they're like, I have a car, I have a vehicle, okay? But yeah, I think this concept, for me, I hold it as like, this is the truth of our species. And even if it's denied, we don't disappear. We find ways to persist. We find ways to find love. We find ways to find beauty, find pleasure, find our creative lineage, right? It doesn't go anywhere. And by acknowledging it, what then becomes possible, right? New dreams, new pathways. And I want to invite people, if you're watching, if you add questions into the comment box, if you drop questions that you might have into the comment box, I'll try to weave them in. I have a lot of my own, but I'm also generous and kind and sharing. I'm trying to learn to share more. So if you do have questions about this incredible work from Shayda, you can ask them there and I'll weave them in. So the next question I have for you, actually, I'm going to flip these, because you just mentioned the crip-centric liberated zone, is how does it feel to be in a crip-centered liberated zone? And what does it take to create such zones, such spaces?
I was going to say joy, but the word that kind of became louder in my head over that is new. I mean, I feel, so the first time I went to a performance, I was overwhelmed at the thoughtfulness of space. And it was very much a crip-centric liberated zone, right? I feel like their performance spaces, their workshop spaces are crip-centric liberated zones, and they're temporary, but then they grow again in different places. But it was the first time I was in a diverse disability space. It was the first time I saw people of color, queer folks, gender nonconforming folks, and we're all kind of occupying space together. And the space met our bodies, as opposed to like our bodies going in and like asking for need. It was like, it was there. So there were, audio descriptions, ASL interpreters, gender neutral restrooms, quiet spaces, which as an anxious person, like that was a gift. Cozy, comfortable chairs made for all bodies. And so it was very, very new. And then I felt a lot of, I was very emotional watching the performance. One, because I was surrounded by people with similar or distinct, but like we all came from a similar familial place. And afterwards, there was this feeling of like longing, like imagining like, oh, what if all our spaces could inhabit such tenderness, and such crip care and love. And so that's what it felt like. And then now I'm just continuously reimagining what the different spaces I'm in could possibly look like to maintain that crip-centricity. So whether it's classrooms, whether it's events, like how could we do that work?
Yeah.
You know, even if the majority of folks in that space are not disabled, like there is so much value to be gained from those practices.
Yeah. And there's so much to be said around needs, you know, like the different needs people have that, I mean, I will say the times I've been in crip-centric liberated zone space, what amazes me is that it allows our needs to come to the surface, and we recognize how much repression we're doing on a regular basis, or overriding, or forcing ourselves to be uncomfortable or to handle the impacts. You know, I remember the first few years of being in spaces where people were like asking for it to be scent free, and like the process of going, you know, trying to understand and finally hearing stories from people who are like, this is what it's like for me to go through the world usually. You know, here's the suffering that I experience. And then, you know, just going into spaces and being like, oh, the need is the front, the need is the center, the need is the heart of what's happening here. And it means that everyone can start to be aware of their needs in a different way. And there's a real beauty of community that comes from weaving that care, that care making. And, you know, I think the thing that activists and organizers will feel is like, that's going to slow, it's slowing, you know, we got to go so fast, and all that intentionality and care is so slow. And yet I find that the work that results in the spaces where that care is present is almost always much more relevant work, because it's not speeding along looking at the surface level issues, but it's actually like trying to drop down and figure out like, what are the root needs that we share? What are the root needs of this community space? Which I'm like, oh, that makes much more sense in terms of how we're building a future together. Yeah.
And I feel like it's also the, you know, consideration is a big part of it. Something that I noticed actually this was in the first and second disability justice primer that Sins Invalid put out.
Yeah.
Is, you know, there was this conversation of like, how do we consider access, but expand access so that we're thinking about disabled folks, but also people with children that might come to protests, or our elders. Like, what would it mean to put disabled folks and elders at the front and have them set the pace of the walking? So I think, and I'm starting to notice and have conversations in classrooms where folks are kind of sharing how just the experience of being at home, working from home in this pandemic time that we're in is inviting people to reconsider slowness, although I'm also hearing like the push to go back to something that was incredibly toxic, very toxic idea of normativity. But there's so much ripeness with slowness.
There is. I mean, I will say this. I feel like I want to imagine a society in which all the different ways of being can exist, you know, for the people who are like, I really like to be in a packed, loud office space with people ideating in every direction, and that's what gets me going. Cool. We should definitely have that. But it shouldn't be forced on everyone that we need to live this cubicle life or whatever it is. You know, for someone like me, I'm like, I could never have imagined how incredible it would feel to my body to not be flying 2 to 3 times a week or 2 to 3 times a month even. It's incredible. I mean, like, it makes me emotional to realize what I was putting my body through in the name of community building, right? Where I was like, oh, what can I build when I'm in this much pain and override? You know, what can I build? And in a space, the airlines are not like, oh, I love your body. I want to make all these adjustments.
Yeah.
So, so I think that there's something around the slowness, and also saying there's room for everyone to have experiences that actually work for you. And I think that piece, to me, this Crip Kinship part of it is saying, like, we all have different needs and there's room for all of them to get met. And all of us can find the kin that we need to meet those needs with us. And that, to me, is a revelation, right? That it's like, it's not saying everyone has to move to one way of being. I think of that. There's this Ojibwe ancestor now, Walter Brissett, who said the most European idea is to think there's one way to do everything. And that shows up to me when I read this, is I'm just like, exactly, there's so many ways. There's so many ways that we are, and like, how do we create society that orients around that? And I had one more question, and Pablo Alvarez asked it more beautifully than I did. So I'm going to read it the way Pablo asked. Mine was just like, how did this change you? Pablo says, I'm so grateful to be here in community. I really needed this today. Shayda, how did your own dreams shift and change with witnessing and writing about Sins Invalid?
Oh my goodness. Hello, friend. Hello, Pablo. You know how we were talking about, you were just describing, Adrienne, like the space that Crip Kinship opened. One of the words that was coming to mind when I was listening was permission. And yeah. Yes. And so kind of that, I want to bring that word into the question that you asked, and Pablo's asking too, like, I most certainly was working from a place of doubt and smallness, and I'm now able to. One of my students introduced me to this amazing interview that Sonia Renee Taylor gave, and she said that when she feels small, or she has a lot of imposter experience and just doubt in general, instead of immediately adopting it as her own, she asks, what oppression is happening right now?
Yes.
I was like, okay, this message arrived when it needed to. And so in writing this book, I very much was able to, although I'm still working on it, I have not perfected this, but I was very much able to slow down and feel the joy of working on this and speaking to community and recording history. And then also the next day feeling a lot of just doubt and concern. Was I doing a good enough job to really honor these stories? And so to arrive to a place of conclusion, I feel like I have more love and compassion for myself as a writer, and I'm very grateful that I did the project in slowness, as disability justice invites us to do. So it was just, it really gave me an understanding of what is possible and why it just really satisfied that original need that I had for being in community and just resisting the forced erasure that so many of us have experienced.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Like, I think that a book is the right book for you to be writing when it's returning you to yourself, or helping you understand yourself in the process of writing it. And there's a few more questions in the chat that I'm going to come to, but there's one I wanted to ask you because I'm like, I just think it needs to be written about and spoken about so much more, which is crip sex. Crip sex as a transformative pleasure universe is one of the chapters in this book, and there's just so much that is really powerful here. And I'm reminded of, the direct action, the history of, nonviolent direct action, and how one of the reasons that people did direct action, particularly big actions like the lunch counter, was people have not seen this, and so they think it's not possible, and seeing it immediately they have to contend with it being possible. And I was thinking that as I was reading this chapter, particularly, that people don't think about disability and sex. People who have severe disabilities of all kinds having great sex and having sex that is beyond, in some ways, the sex that people are having from an able-bodied perspective. And again, it's one of those things where it's like you turn the prism and all of a sudden there's a whole nother world there. So I just wanted to ask you anything that you wanted to share about the writing of that chapter, what you learned, what shifted in you around crip sex as you were exploring that piece. And, I feel like we need a lot more writing about this. So.
Yeah, I mean, my writing around that was informed by Sins Invalid for sure, because they write a lot about crip sex in their disability justice primer. And it's this, sex, pleasure, beauty is this very like a super necessary theme that is woven intentionally in every single performance, regardless of the theme. And so my understanding of crip sex also comes from other disability studies scholars like Tobin Siepers and other amazing folks. And I think the disability justice element of it that came in for me was the conversation of political right around pleasure and around sex. And again, similar to like crip time that we were talking about, and how there's multiple ways to engage with time.
Yes.
One of the most powerful openings was, there's multiple ways to engage in this thing called sex or pleasure. That includes all sexualities, all gender identities. I mean, there's this beautiful performance piece that Nomi Lamb does where she just covers herself in honey and is singing. I mean, that is the most erotic, pleasurable thing, like just the sticky, the glow of it. And so,
that, and I love Leroy's piece around like being someone whose disability has led him to drool for his life, and actually claiming that and calling it droolicious and being like, yes, I found someone who finds that to be the sexiest thing about me. And I'm like, that's the way,
That's the way. Yeah. And also like all these same principles around disability justice, like bringing those into moments of sex and intimacy, right? Like, I just like, that was one very powerful gift that I noticed, like, oh, wow, that's applicable to everybody. But what would slowness mean and look like? What would conversation mean and look like?
Yeah.
And India Harville talks about like how she negotiates her body and her partner's body when she's in pain, and how that influences her embodiment and just relationship to sex. And it's that's like, right. Yes, exhaustion, pain, all of those things come into it.
Yeah, it's one of the things after pleasure activism came out, I had lined up a bunch of interviews with people with disabilities that didn't end up coming through. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, I want to do a whole other project just on this. But it was one of the main areas of question people had is like, how do I fuck when I've got this pain in my hip or this is going on? And I just think there's so much in here, and there's so much in those primers around having the conversations, like learning to be in a loving relationship around what the body wants and needs and what actually feels good to the body mind, Mm-hmm. So I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to go with this one, which is about writing your first book. And it's asking the question, this is from Amora Blessing, who is differently able, dealing with immense pain and numbness, and finds discipline very lacking, but is trying to write this spiritual memoir about the journey that they've been on with disability after it kind of pulled them out of their life as a healer. So how to find that writing voice, right? And how to move through the struggles with the body to actually get to the page. So anything you have to offer there?
Amora, we need your book. Number one.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I will say that was very important for my practice, two things. The first thing was I wrote this whole book in community. And so whether that was sitting with friends and colleagues in person before the pandemic started, in coffee shops, and just being accountable in that way and being in space with other people that were writing.
Yes.
And then now it's, meeting with folks online and doing that work, and then doing check-ins with them. And there's a big part of the acknowledgments in the back of the book that's like just gratitude to all the people I wrote with.
That's right.
And that were present. And when I was most exhausted, or when the doubt felt largest, my writing altar, that was invaluable. And I would take the crystals that are on my altar, I would put it on my computer, like whatever needs to happen.
Listen, I put this rock here. Sometimes I'm just like, listen, bring it down, calm down.
Yeah, I mean, and I love that we both have Christy Rhodes tarot deck.
Yes.
So asking for, advice in that way. So just creating the writing space so that you have that support, and working in community. Those were two of the biggest things.
Yeah, I think that's really big. I would add too, like, don't be afraid of dictation. I think that people really think of writing as like a certain physical activity, and not understanding, like, when you're in a conversation, you're writing, it's just not choosing maybe to put it down. But if there's conversations that you're like, I know that I'm brilliant when I'm talking to this person, and that we push each other to another level, like, record that or dictate. Sometimes I will dictate a piece as if I'm talking to a good friend, because I'm like, oh, I know that I'll say it more accessibly, more clearly this way. And then later you can just grab that transcript, and your work is editing more than just sitting and having to push it out with your fingers. So really taking care of the body as a writer, like taking breaks and moving around, hydrating. My friend Toshi Regan says this, like, whatever you're creating, the act of creation, you're also an athlete in that. So if you're writing, you're an athlete at writing, you're an athlete at singing, you're an athlete at art. And to treat yourself that way, like, how do you strengthen and hydrate and flexible and rest and all of that? So, yeah.
I love that. And even, like, you reminded me, like, for editing, I often would not look at the screen. I would just have my computer read it to me.
Yes, exactly.
Just take a break.
Yeah, and lay down. I'm always like, lay down when you can, listen, lay down and listen. Like, your reader is going to do it that way.
Sit in the sun and recharge.
Oh my goodness. I love that. So this has been such a gorgeous time, gorgeous conversation. You're incredible. And people can go ahead and pre-order this book. So the link is, you just push it. I'm sure you can push something that you see on your screen. Jane, do you want to tell this better than I can? Pre-order the book. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you, Shayda, for letting me be here with you.
Can I just... I'm sending, like, hugs and good vibes from Los Angeles. I am so, so absolutely grateful that we got to chat.
Me too. I'm really grateful too. I'm sending vibes back to you from Durham. And wow, there's a lot happening there.
I hear it. Yeah.
You and to people who need that ambulance to get somewhere, all of it. Everybody deserves some love right now. So.
I want to thank both of you so much for this incredible conversation. It has been so meaningful as someone who loves a queer, disabled person. It is just incredible to hear these beautiful stories and both of your stories. The book is available from Left Bank Books. I cannot wait to see this book on our shelves. It is going to be a joyous, joyous moment. Shayda has been so kind to send us book plates, so we will have those available, making this a signed copy that is available to... Book. It's a beautiful cover. Oh, I love this cover.
Can I just amplify the amazing Ka Yongni, who did the art for the cover of this book? If y'all don't follow Ka, I mean, their work is amazing. Yeah.
I want to thank the audience as well for being here tonight, for being your amazing, incredible selves. It's been so... Shayda, when we get done, I want you to take a look through the comments and just see all of the love that has been pouring out from the audience. And I believe that we are going to stick around for just a tiny bit after we conclude so we can take a little selfie, which I'm super excited about. And audience, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again really soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, y'all.